There's a strategy for getting better at learning that I've been using for the thousands of people that I've coached for the last 10 years. It's a strategy that not only helped me go from studying 20 hours a day to 2 hours a day while maintaining top marks, but also create that kind of change in other people as well. I call it the broken barrel approach, and although everyone is different, I found that when used correctly, this approach is effective for virtually every person I've ever coached. I'm going to show you exactly how you can use the broken barrel approach, as well as explain the 5 dimensions that you have to understand to use the approach in the first place. But before we get into that, we need to understand the more common ways that people try to get better at learning and why that absolutely does not work. There are generally 3 ways people try to become a better learner. The first one, which is the most common, is the silver bullet approach. Now, if you have ever asked, what is the best studying technique? Then you're probably using the silver bullet approach. And this approach is pretty much doomed to be a waste of time from the very beginning. So 80 years ago, there was this French writer called Henri Poirot who wrote this novel about werewolves, and this werewolf was causing havoc in the town. But no one could stop this werewolf. And then at the end of the book, this hunter comes up and shoots the werewolf with a bullet cast out of silver, and everyone is safe. And thus the term silver bullet was born. So why is it that asking what is the best studying technique, the silver bullet approach? Because it assumes that there is a single, almost magical solution that solves all of your learning and studying related problems. If this was true, then learning to learn would be very easy. Becoming a genius would be a walk in the park. But unfortunately, there is no such thing as the best technique. There is no universal trick or hack that works for everyone in every circumstance, for every challenge. For example, flashcards are a great technique for memorizing and recalling isolated facts, but they're pretty useless for complex problem solving. This is why it's not a very popular method for postgraduate study or professional work. Likewise, you can have 10 different people using the exact same studying technique and have very different outcomes. And as long as you're looking for a silver bullet solution, you're never really gonna get any better at studying because you're looking for something that actually doesn't exist. Once we accept the fact that there's no such thing as a best studying technique, we can ask the real questions that make a difference. Like, what are the parts of the way that I learn that are helping me? Which parts are holding me back? And importantly, what are my learning strengths and weaknesses? Everyone has different strengths and weaknesses, and it is the combination of these strengths and weaknesses that determine the results that you get. Which brings us to the second, less common but smarter approach to improving studying, which is the strengths first approach. And as the name suggests, this is when we focus on our learning strengths and we enhance them to get better at studying. Unlike the silver bullet approach, figuring out our learning strengths and then making them stronger is a lot more personalized. And when it comes to learning, personalized means effective. So what even is a learning strength? Well, a strength is something that you find naturally easier to be good at. They're a manifestation of our natural talents and tendencies, which means that when we put effort into improving them, they can become our ultimate weapon. At least that's the idea. But when it comes to learning and studying, that doesn't actually work. And the reason is because for learning, you are only as good as your weakest link. So imagine this wooden barrel is our ability to learn. Now, if one of these pieces is broken, it doesn't matter how high the other pieces are. When we try to fill the barrel with water, the highest level it's gonna reach is the level of the broken plank. Now, when it comes to learning, there are 5 planks that make up your learning ability barrel. I call these the 5 dimensions of learning. And these are deep processing, self-regulation, mindset, retrieval, and self-management. I'll explain those dimensions a little bit more later. But let's say, for example, I have great processing skills, which means I'm able to understand concepts deeply, connect information together for complex problem solving, but I have terrible retrieval skills, which means that I'm never really revising what I learn, therefore I'm forgetting things needlessly, and therefore I'm going to be missing out on marks. It doesn't matter if my processing ability is sky high, if my retrieval is the broken part of the barrel, then I'm always going to be limited by that. Or if I have great learning skills, but then I procrastinate like crazy, well then again, I'm going to be limited by that. Which means that for learning, our results reflect our weaknesses more than they reflect our strengths. Which is why instead of focusing on the strengths first approach, I'm going to teach you the broken barrel approach. The broken barrel approach starts with addressing the weakest links first, the parts of our barrel that are the most broken. And the broken barrel approach is a game changer because it ensures that your method of learning is personalized to what is actually holding you back from being better. And remember, when it comes to learning, personalized means more effective. So the broken barrel strategy in itself is pretty straightforward. Figure out your weaknesses and then improve them until they're not your weakness anymore. Reevaluate, see where your next weakness is, and rinse and repeat. I recommend reevaluating to see if your weaknesses have changed every 3 or 4 months. The hard part is figuring out your strengths and weaknesses in the first place. And for learning, figuring this out is not easy. In fact, it's so not easy that there's even research around something called the black box of learning, which basically says that people know that in order for them to get good results, they need to put in time and effort. But in terms of how that time and effort becomes a result is inside what's called the black box. It's basically a mystery. And inside this black box are the processes of learning. And until we're able to open up this black box and see what's inside it, we're never going to be able to effectively translate our time and effort into better results. This is the reason why I said that the silver bullet approach was doomed to waste time from the very beginning. Most people have no idea which dimension they're weaker in. In fact, most people are not even thinking about which weaknesses they have in the first place. And research has repeatedly shown that people are pretty bad at identifying their true learning weaknesses, which means you could spend an entire week trying out a new learning technique to see absolutely no improvement because it's not targeting the right part of your barrel, aka you're not targeting your weaknesses. In fact, when you do this, it actually makes it even harder to improve than doing nothing at all, because now you've just given yourself more things to think about, which is taking time and effort and energy away from the things that could be directly helping you to improve, as if you didn't have enough to worry about already. So how do we actually figure out our learning strengths and weaknesses? When I coach people on a one-on-one basis, I'm able to open up the black box for them. I guide them to figure out where their strengths and weaknesses are. And as a result, I've been able to help people who have struggled to improve for years make multiple breakthroughs in just 2 or 3 months. Obviously, I can't do one-on-ones with every single one of you, but I still want to help you out. So I've created a free quiz that will ask you a series of questions that assess and evaluate your learning strengths and weaknesses. The calculation and questions are ones that I've not only tested and refined across almost 20,000 learners going through my paid program at I Can Study, but I've also conducted a study with Monash University to assess its validity. It's free to use, it only takes a few minutes, and at the end you'll get a personalized report on your learning strengths and weaknesses based on 3 of the most important dimensions for most learners. Based on the combination of your results, it will also tell you your learner type, which helps you figure out which dimension you should work on first. I'll leave a link in the description for you to check that out. Now, the reports will go into a little bit more detail, but I'll briefly describe each of the 5 dimensions and when they become strengths versus weaknesses. Each dimension is equally important, and remember that a limitation in just one of those dimensions can limit your overall result. Now, the first dimension is the dimension that defines genius. When people talk about learning or intelligence or someone who's a genius, they're usually just talking about this dimension, and that is deep processing. Deep processing is your ability to understand and extract meaningful learning from information. Deep processing is what allows you to form stronger memories, understand information more deeply, form connections between ideas, and ultimately use what you've learned to solve complex problems. Deep processing is probably a strength for you if you find it easy to do well, you don't have to study as much as other people to do well, and you feel like your memory and depth of understanding tend to be stronger than most other people. On the other hand, it's probably a weakness if you struggle to do well despite studying a lot. It takes you a long time to understand concepts, or you struggle to apply your knowledge in ways that are different to how it was directly taught to you. Most top learners have pretty good deep processing, which is also why you shouldn't just copy the study techniques that top learners use, because they can get away with using pretty mediocre techniques and do well anyway because they can compensate for it with just better deep processing. I like to think of deep processing as how powerful the engine is in your car. But remember, each dimension is equally important, so if deep processing is the power of your engine, then what also matters is how well you can drive the car, and that's the next dimension. The second dimension is self-regulation, and I find that this is a common weakness in most people that haven't been trained on learning skills, which is most people. Self-regulation is the awareness of how you learn, the methods you use, the way that you think, and then your ability to then make adjustments to those methods and processes to achieve your goals. This is probably a strength if you have a clear idea about how you study and which methods you use. You also know how you think while you're using those methods. You understand which techniques are helping you or harming you, and you can make adjustments to those techniques to keep your learning effective even when you have different time pressures, different subjects, levels of difficulty, or different levels of energy. Now, I'm saying probably these are your strengths and weaknesses because these are all pretty generalized descriptions. I still recommend taking the quiz because it's going to give you a much more personalized look at which of your weaknesses is limiting you the most and to what magnitude. Anyway, self-regulation is probably a weakness for you if you don't really know where to start with improving the way that you study, you don't have a clear idea about what methods or processes you use, and you're not sure how you'd make a predictable change in your results by adjusting your techniques or processes. Self-regulation becomes much more important usually in the later years, especially if your deep processing isn't as high, or your deep processing is high, but you're aiming for a competitive result amongst lots of other people that also have high deep processing. Now, I would argue that although every dimension is equally important, the next dimension is potentially the most crucial of all. I say that because it's the most limiting weakness in over 70% of learners I've assessed. This is a dimension that focuses on how we respond to stress, challenges, and making mistakes. This third dimension is called mindset. Here's the thing. Learning to learn takes trial and error. It feels uncertain a lot of the time, most of the time, and it requires a lot of experimentation. Which means if you're afraid of making mistakes and you don't know how to handle uncertainty, you're not really going to improve. This is the kind of situation where people can spend years trying to get better at learning and make almost zero progress. The mindset dimension is probably a strength for you if you're able to jump into new challenges and experiment very easily. You're also able to make mistakes and learn from them quickly. On the other hand, it's probably a weakness if you don't like experimenting because it feels uncertain, and you avoid making mistakes because you're afraid of making them. You might feel a significant blow to your confidence or self-esteem when you don't do well, and you might ask a lot of clarifying questions before giving something new a go. These clarifying questions are basically an attempt to reduce the level of uncertainty and avoid making mistakes. Having said that, hands down, The most impressive transformations I've ever seen are the ones who originally started off being limited by the mindset dimension and then improved it. Now, the next dimension is what takes a raw diamond and polishes it into a sparkling gem. You see, human memory is far from perfect, and no matter how good your deep processing or self-regulation are, there's always going to be gaps. There's always going to be things that we forget, and we can always be faster or more fluent with applying what we've learned. This is the fourth dimension, retrieval. Retrieval is how we recall and test ourselves on what we've previously learned. It's probably a strength if you have a good spaced retrieval schedule and you challenge yourself at multiple levels of difficulty. It's probably a weakness if you don't really review what you've learned before at all, or the way that you challenge yourself isn't reflective of the way that you actually need to use your knowledge. Retrieval is actually a dimension that many students score pretty highly on, and that's because they've heard lots of great things about spaced retrieval and flashcards. However, most of those students also aren't seeing great results, and that's because it's usually not their limiting weakness. In other words, they weren't using the broken barrel approach. And finally, there is potentially no other dimension that is as frustrating to fix as the next one. If you've ever wasted an entire evening scrolling through social media or binging your favorite series, or you've struggled to manage your time or stay focused, then you have been limited by this final dimension, and that is self-management. Self-management is the dimension that is focused on the way that you manage your time, how you prioritize your tasks, how you manage your focus and distractions, how you avoid procrastination. Basically, ensure that you're spending your time in the way that you should be. And it's probably a strength for you if you can manage your time and tasks sustainably and consistently. You prioritize your tasks effectively, ensuring that you're spending your time on what really matters. You can manage your focus and reduce distractions, and you can mitigate the procrastination tendencies that everyone has. It's probably a weakness if basically you struggle with all of those things, or you can only do those in short bursts of intense concentration, which is not sustainable. Once we figure out where our true strengths and weaknesses lie, we can usually improve our learning ability week after week. In fact, when I'm coaching someone, if I don't see progress on a weekly basis, it tells me that we're probably not focusing on the right true weakness. So please do make sure to use that free quiz that I made for you guys. It goes through the first 3 dimensions, which are usually the most important for most people. In fact, I'll actually show you how to use it. So this is the quiz. First, I'll start off by answering the questions. I'm not gonna answer this the way that I used to study like 10 years ago when I was an amoeba floating through the learning universe. So you can see the results that I've gotten here. It said I'm a sprout. It's rated my overall score 65%. Honestly, it feels kind of high compared to how it felt at the time, but I guess I did end up doing pretty well in that year. So it goes through, tells me exactly which each dimension means for me, how much of an impact it has, and what I need to do about it. And I also get a more personalized, comprehensive report sent through in my email. And I can now take that information and start using the broken barrel approach, which I can tell you is about 1,000 times faster than trying to figure out my learning strengths and weaknesses like years ago, which required me to spend years and thousands of hours on trial and error to figure it out. Again, I'll leave the link in the description for you to check out. I hope this approach gives you as much success as it has for me and my students. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.